Hello gang, YouTube's foremost worms tier maker Ruffled Bricks here. Today we're going to do a tier list of all 45 missions in the Worms World Party mission campaign. Much like the Worms Armageddon missions list that I did, I'm going to rank all these missions based on how enjoyable I find them to speedrun, which may mean that some of your favourites get a bit of a kicking for being not that fast or interesting. Something to note here is that if you've seen any of my stream content, you may be aware that Worms World Party is my least favourite of the 3 second generation Worms games. By no means does this mean that I hate speedrunning Worms World Party, as I'm pretty much physically unable to speedrun any game that I dislike violently. But compared to Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon, I do find the missions overall in this campaign to be slightly lacking. So if you are a big Worms World Party fan, probably best to either give this video a miss or make an appointment with your dentist, as you're probably going to be gritting your teeth quite heavily during this one. So let's get into the first mission, which is Good Ship Armageddon. Much like Pumpkin Problems in Armageddon, this mission basically just sort of eases you into the concept of what doing the missions is going to be about in this game. The object of this mission is to grab a crate from the top left. You get very few resources in order to do this. Most of the mission is just platforming. There's an enemy worm who doesn't really do anything throughout, it's just kind of there in a ceremonial role, and you're using girders and jetpacks to make your way to the crate, which gets a bit repetitive throughout this run. The main bit of speedrun tech that we use in this mission is we actually reset this mission once before we start it, as much like in Worms Armageddon, the more you reset or fail this mission, the more the game will reward your incompetence or cowardice by giving you extra crates that you can use for the mission. In this instance we get a low gravity crate, which means that we can save a turn at the beginning of the mission. You set low gravity, you place the girder halfway between the little boat and the big boat, and then you backflip onto the girder and jump off the girder onto the ship right before the retreat time runs out. It's a little bit tight, so the challenge here of actually getting from one platform to the other is kind of engaging, but it's a trick that you end up having to use quite a lot throughout this run. The jetpack you kind of need to concentrate on as well, as it has quite low fuel, but it's not too hard. Generally though, this is quite a gentle way of easing the player into the missions if you ignore the nuclear bomb that goes off at the beginning and the frenzied sudden death music that plays in the background. It's classic sort of starting mission. I would put this in the average tier. Next up we have Mission 2, Do Wop. Not entirely sure where the name comes from. I don't think this mission has anything to do with Laurel Hill. It's kind of disappointing that you go from a mission with a beautifully drawn ship in it to whatever the hell this is meant to be. Feels like we got half a photo of one of Team 17's house. We'll start with the pros on this mission, which is that it's the only mission throughout any of the 3 second generation games that actively makes you use the pneumatic drill. The drill doesn't really get a look in that often in the missions, so it's nice to see it represented here. The object of this one is simply to drill down to the enemy worm at the bottom and knock them into the water. You get to use as many weapons as you like during the turn, which is a recurring feature in Worms World Party's missions. So that makes things pretty brisk, but it's just such a non-challenge. This feels much more like a training module of some sort than a fully fledged mission in its own right, which is kind of a problem that several of the missions in Worms World Party suffer from. Another thing that's annoying about this mission is the end of it is very RNG based. You have to hope that the drill knocks them to the right so they land in the water. If the drill knocks them to the left, you then have to grab the crate which contains a baseball bat and knock them into the water. It's basically a 50-50 chance as to whether you get the optimum speedrun ending for this mission. There's probably some elaborate way of manipulating that by getting jumps at specific timing throughout the level and movements specifically and that, and maybe if that gets discovered I might feel differently about this mission. But as it currently stands, this mission is just so basic. Like, I've managed to do this mission blindfolded in a marathon setting. That's how easy it is. So yeah, for offering no real challenge or interest this mission, we got an early entry into the blood and stomach pills tier for me. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just a big burger of nothing. Mission 3 next, it's Jumble Sail. This is a weird mission in the context of Worms World Party, as it's probably the only mission that you could slot into Worms Armageddon's campaign, and it wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb. This mission very much follows the format of many of the missions in Armageddon, whereby they give you a selection of weapons that you can use to kill off the enemy worms and just say to you, do what you can with these. Compared to most of the other Worms World Party missions, this is not particularly prescriptive, which actually makes it feel a lot more open and fun. The main challenge on this one was figuring out how to consistently bring this mission down to a 2-turner, and of course, as per usual, Mad Black was the one who found the way. Honestly, if you can get him to root your favourite game, do it. He's absolutely fantastic. On the first turn, we make use of the game's deterministic RNG by jumping to the left, holding left for 3 wiggles, and then we fire punch the enemy worm just to get them a bit further to the left. Doing this will usually make them knock themselves into the water, although it's not always guaranteed. At the very least, it puts them in a good position where we can knock them in on the second turn using a bazooka on the leftmost enemy worm. The mine up by the top worm is what we use to get that worm in, and there's basically 2 different bazooka shots we have to learn to ensure that we can get 2 or 3 worms in, depending on what the situation is by the time we get to turn 2. Both of them are based on terrain markers, which can take a little while to get used to, given that the crosshair positions can look so similar when you first start trying to learn this kind of tech. But yeah, this is a pretty fun mission, this one, just because you don't feel like you're being spoon-fed the solution like you are in many others. I kind of wish more of the Worms World Party missions had been like this, rather than the way that they turned out. I know that makes me sound like, oh, you just want Worms Armageddon, and yeah, you got me there. But yeah, this mission goes in the great tier. I find this one pretty enjoyable. Next up, we have got Shell Shock, or the Mine Cannon mission as it's most colloquially known. Or the Mine Cannon mission as it's colloquially or the Mine Cannon mission as it's colloquially known. Synonyms for colloquially. Or the Mine Cannon mission as it's also known. This is the first of what I would call the gimmick missions in the game. There's several missions in Worms World Party that have been set up to create very specific chain reactions based on things like mines, crates, kind of like Team 17 are creating their own little Rube Goldberg machines, and your job is just to try and set them off correctly. Some of these missions are just convoluted beyond all belief, although this one I would say is actually not too bad. In this one you get no weapons except a girder, and the object is to grab the falling first aid crate, which loads the cannon in your little boat with mines. By hitting the left hand mine, you launch the right mine over to the island where the enemy worms are, and you do that until you've killed all of them off. The girder is basically there to stop you from being ejected from the boat, although actually in the way that we do it, it's not particularly necessary to do that. You only need to do 1 shot to kill the enemy worms off, and what you do with the girder to make this happen is you place it at a pixel specific spot by the uppermost worm. You can line this up by setting the worm name so that the team name shows above the enemy, which gives you a nice little C that you can use to line up the girder properly. It's a pretty difficult position to get and takes some practice, but once you get it, all you need to do is collect 8 first aid crates and set the cannon off so that it blows a mine onto the top worm and deflects them into knocking the other 2 worms into the water. There are some aspects of this strat that are less than ideal. Having to wait for the 8 first aid crates to drop is a bit of a trudge, although I do quite like the challenge of trying to place the girder whilst grabbing the crates, as the game keeps trying to yank the camera back towards the boat, so you have to keep the girder moving more or less in order to keep the camera focused. The worst thing about this strat is that sometimes, because of the frame detection on the mines, you can end up accidentally getting launched over to the island, when you fire the cannon. And in some cases that will knock the lowest worm out of position, which means that you effectively have to restart because you've got nothing that you can use to kill the worm at that point. Should also give a quick shout out to the original speedrun strat that was found by We Suck at Speedruns. Well worth checking out their Worms World Party ILs on YouTube if you've not already, as there's some fantastic IL performances in those. We Suck's method basically involved collecting 10 first aid crates and then nudging down the cannon until the right hand mine actually blew you onto the island, at which point you can use a series of jump knocks to kill the 3 enemy worms off. This was a really novel way of completing this mission, although once again, due to the frame detection on the mine, the reliability of it left a fair amount to be desired. But it did mean nice little time saves, like being able to collect the first aid crates quicker by placing a girder up to their spawn point and then just jumping into the spawn point as you grab one of the crates. It can be a little difficult to ensure you get the right number of crates using that method, but I used to quite enjoy that when it went well. So yeah, there's 2 enjoyable, interesting ways of subverting this mission that I think makes it more fun than it has any right to be. I'm going to put this mission in the good tier. Mission number 5 here, it's raining mines. This mission seems to predominantly exist to introduce a new mechanic in the Worms World Party missions, which is the falling, respawning mines, for want of a better term. Basically, you have to use the jetpack here to dodge past the mines and place a mine on the right hand worm, then dodge past the mines again and place a mine on the left hand worm. It's kind of a cool concept, but again, the mission is just so basic that it doesn't really offer that much interest. It also introduces Worms World Party's team coloured mines gimmick, which I don't think there was any need to make our mines look like a half-formed blancmange. The green and red ones look pleasant if you'd bite into them. These ones just look like they give you indigestion. There's one little speedrun trick that you can do in this mission, which is that you can jetpack up to where the falling mines spawn. And if you get the angle and timing right, then it will knock your worm into the enemy worm, knocking them into the water. If you've actually placed the second mine, then there's nothing to lose really by doing that, so you might as well give it a go. If you want to try it without placing the second mine, then all I can say is good luck to you. But yeah, this is another mission which is just kind of... It's fine, it's not unpleasant to do, it's just kind of lacking. Maybe a longer mission where you had to go back and forth several times between the mines might be interesting, or if there was more falling mines you had to jetpack between, like maybe some spins on it could have made this more interesting. As it stands, I'm going to put this in the average tier as well, although I say this feels a bit slicker to do than Good Ship Armageddon, so we're going to put it above that one. Next up, it's time to take out the trash. I'd say this is the mission that really sets up the fact that this game is going to be much more focused on platforming than it is on combat. You have to make your way across the 2 rooftops, once again with only a limited selection of movement apparatus. I think someone at Team 17 must have gathered that having ninja ropes in some of the Armageddon missions made moving a little bit of a cheese if you were good at roping, so they decided to punish Worms players by whittling it down to just girders and parachutes and bungees and jetpacks with very little fuel. Having said that though, this mission contains a very pleasing skip that elevates my enjoyment of it fairly significantly. You start with a few little quarter pixel shenanigans right at the top, just so that you can jump onto the top of this house. You then place a girder at a very specific position, which sets up the level's big skip. Once again, the enemy worms in this mission don't attack you, but after each enemy turn, 3 mines drop into the gap in the middle. And if you've placed the first girder at the right position and stand at the far right of it, the first mine that falls will actually launch your worm over to the second building so that the crate catches them safely. Mablack actually found a nice visual cue for ensuring you always get the girder in the right place. There's a telegraphing arrow that points to a parachute crate on this mission, but by moving the camera up so that the arrow is directly above the crate, you can then use the numbers that appear above it to line up your girder. And once you get to the right, use low gravity so that you can jump your way to the bottom right of the mission, and you get a Patsy's Magic Bullet crate which you can use to kill off the 3 enemy worms. It's nice that this mission actually lets you use a super weapon that you get in a crate, as that's not something this game likes to do very often. Overall, I'd say the mine launch and the Patsy save this mission from being thrown out into the garbage. Gonna put this mission in the good tier, and I think I would rank this one below Shell Shock. Next up we have Missile Base. I would say this mission is the first major run killer in the run, at least for me. Sometimes run killers can be enjoyable in the sense that they're a real big challenge that you like to rise up to. This is not one of them. This is a grab the crate mission, and the vanilla version of this is basically just 3 minutes of blowtorching from one side of the map to the other, which is pretty tedious, but unfortunately the alternative to that is bungee fling. I have to admit, the bungee fling that we use in Worms Armageddon's mission Do the Locomotion has grown on me quite a bit over the years, but this one has not done that for me yet. You can do the bungee in 2 ways, and both of them are quite frustrating. In one instance, you place a girder above the mushroom cloud sign that you start on, and use that to give you the right momentum to fling yourself across to the right hand side of the map. You only get 1 bungee in this mission, so if you end up losing momentum and just drooping aimlessly on the right hand side of the girder, then that's pretty much a reset. Worms World Party Remastered didn't receive the same wealth of patches that Armageddon did over the years. So when you do the bungee in this mission, you will see that Team 17 weren't expecting your worm to go above a certain angle. This doesn't affect how the bungee works per se, but visually I do find it quite distracting. There's many things that can go wrong with this bungee though. Ideally you want to land next to the tank, grabbing the crate in the process, but if you don't grab the crate and land by it, then that leaves you pretty vulnerable to a kill from the enemy worms. Sometimes you can tank the damage, but other times it's not going to happen. And if you land fairly short of your target, then you just have to use more blowtorches, which kind of negates half the point of doing the bungee anyway. The other bungee was found by Psychotropic, which in my view is significantly more difficult. You just do a bungee off the side of the mushroom cloud sign up to the top of the satellite dish, and with this I think you need to be really proficient at bungeeing, as the momentum you can get off the side of the sign really isn't that expansive. Even in that route though, you still have to use a girder to progress across the landscape, which you have to reset the mission once in order to get. And then the rancid cherry on top of this disheveled cake is that you get a concrete donkey crate at the end of the mission, which you don't get to use, as the mission just goes straight to the congratulations screen once you've collected it. To be fair, in Armageddon there were a few instances like this where you had to collect a crate that contained a much better weapon than you got to use, but they at least gave you some missions like Agent Dennis or Stolen Goods where you could really cut loose with some fun weapons. In Worms Party though, they just continuously dangle a donkey in front of you like a carrot in front of a donkey without ever letting you use it. It just seems like these missions were made by someone kind of vindictive. Yeah, this mission goes fairly low in the blood and stomach pills for me. I really don't find this one that enjoyable. Next up we have got Woodland. Probably the least inspired title that any of the Worms missions have had. Woodland, the land of wood. Yeah, that'll do. However, this mission I actually don't mind because it introduces a trick that we're going to be using quite a lot throughout this run. It's a trick that we like to call Jetpack Trick, which I'll grant you does make it sound a bit like a budget superhero. We first called it Jetpack Trick, but that's a bit too difficult to get your mouth around. So we just flush the sea out and the rest is history. This trick basically helps you get around the fact that the jetpacks that they give you in this run often have very limited fuel. When you're on a jetpack, if you use any weapon that ends the turn, then the game stops caring about the fuel supply of the jetpack, and instead it gives you free reign of the jetpack until the turn time runs out. In this instance it means that once you've collected the jetpack crates using a girder, you can use one jetpack to get you up onto the mountain, mission, and then the second jetpack you can just place a girder while you're in midair, and that'll give you enough fuel to get all the way over to the crate. It's kind of fun catching your worm with the girder so that they don't fall down too far, and then the amount of retreat time you get is fairly limited, so you do need to be pretty on point when it comes to getting to the crate. Another fun little detail in the routing of this one is placing the girder at a specific place to catch the jetpack so that you're low enough that the first enemy worm can't actually fire at you with the handgun. Handgun, as we all know, is one of the most leisurely firearms in the game, so being able to skip that animation is a little bit of a boon. The crate at the end this time dangles 5 concrete donkeys in front of you that you don't get to use, so it very much seems like this has been done by design. It's a pretty pleasant journey, this one, so I'm going to put this one in the good tier, and I'm going to put this one below Shell Shock. Next up we have Jumpjet Defence. This is the first of 6 missions in the game that can be skipped entirely using mission skip. I have decided not to do the run that lets you actually use that glitch, so I am going to be ranking all these 6 missions based on how they are to actually do rather than how fun they are to skip. On paper this mission is actually quite a fun idea. They give you a jetpack and you have to use an Armageddon to kill off the enemy worm on the map. You've got loads of fuel on the jetpack, and the idea is you're just supposed to dodge the meteors as they drop down for a grand total of 20 seconds and then land safely on one of the remaining platforms. I can see why they thought this was a fun idea for a mission, but personally the meteors come down so quickly and their spread is so RNG that it just seems like luck really as to whether you manage to make it or not. I don't know, man, maybe I just don't have the reflexes for this game, what can I say? Need to spend more time training at the arcade with Point Blank 2. There's a slightly slower cheese method that you can use for this mission where rather than dodging the meteors by jetpacking between them, you can just jetpack above the spawn plane of the meteors. That does make for a kind of funny visual when you first do it, but it also trivializes the mission entirely. So it's just kind of like, what's the point? Yeah, nice idea for a mission, this one, but I just don't really think it's that enjoyable in practice. So this one we're going to put in the blood and stomach pills tier as well, although I think just for the sheer comedy of hovering above the spawn plane, I would put this higher than Doo-Wop. Up next, Operation Alcatraz. I like the life raft on this map. There's a strong nautical theme running through the early parts of this campaign. This is another basic grab the crate mission, which is little more than a platforming exercise. We once again use the trick of setting low gravity, placing a girder, and then doing a jump onto the girder and then off the girder during the retreat time. Not that much to write home about here, apart from, once again, you get to use Jet Patrick. This time you throw a grenade to set the retreat time off, which is slightly more practical than doing a girder. And you get to grab an earthquake, another fun super weapon that you don't actually get to use. It's fine, this mission, nothing particularly exciting to report here, although the fact that it's got a Jet Patrick in it does make things a little bit more enjoyable. I think this one belongs either high in average or low in good for me. I'm not quite sure which. I feel like it's sort of on the cusp between the two, like maybe we need an extra tier between good and average. We'll go high in the average for now, and if I change my mind as we go along, maybe I'll move it up to good. We'll see. We've got a core mission here now in the form of Apple of Your Eye. When I first started speedrunning this game and was thinking about doing a tier list, I was pretty darn confident this mission would end up in the blood and stomach pills tier. The vanilla version of this is basically just platforming across these apples whilst dodging a bunch of falling mines, and because you only get a fire punch in this mission, it seemed like there was no way in hell there would be any fun speedrun strats you could do on this one. However, Mad Black, in his own inimitable way, managed to pull something out of the bag. Using a pretty specific set of movements at the beginning, you can get the first mine to launch you across the apple to a position where you can then jump and fire punch at a falling mine, which will then launch you a significant distance across the map. You then time a vertical jump specifically on the right of the next mine, which will launch you into the enemy worm killing them off. This is a tough strat, but it is one that you can pull off consistently if you learn how to do the timing right. It involves focusing quite heavily on the amount of paces that your worm does as they walk, as well as getting really precise timing on when you launch the fire punch. It's one of the few exclusively platformer-based missions in this game that I really enjoy doing. It's a bit too basic to go in the champion tier for me, but I would happily put this one in the great tier. I think I would put this at the bottom of the great tier for the moment. Another of your 5 a day next, as we have Fruit Bastilles. This is probably one of my favourite titles out of any of the missions in the second generation Worms games, so it's a shame that the mission itself isn't that good. It's the first mission in Worms World Party that contains a VIP worm that you have to protect, although to be honest with you, it really isn't clear why they exist. You could basically just have this as a kill the enemy worm mission and nothing about it would be lost in the process. I don't know, maybe the prop department overspent on fancy hats and they were kind of like, well, we better use them. This is another pretty basic platforming exercise. You use a jetpack to get onto the starting tree, and then you use low gravity to do a bunch of jumps, and then a parachute to float across most of the level. You can't actually do jetpack trick on this mission, as you can use a unlimited amount of weapons each turn, so therefore placing a girder doesn't actually end the turn. So this pitiful 7 fuel jetpack that you get at the beginning has no further utility, unfortunately. From a casual perspective, this mission is just kind of not well designed either. There's a target in the centre of the map that you're supposed to hit with the baseball bat so that you can get a fire punch crate that you can use to kill the enemy worm off, but it's like, why don't you just use the baseball bat? Maybe the target is just meant to be a troll or something, but honestly it just seems kind of bungled, the design on this one, and the parachute is basically just holding up and right for about 15 seconds, which is not that engaging. Yeah, this is a blood and stomach pills mission as well, although again I would put this one pretty high up because it's not particularly annoying to do, it's just silly and pointless. As a side note, since recording this video I have learnt how to do Fruit Bastilles blindfolded, and it does make the mission a fair bit more interesting, but this tier list is about how fun the missions are when you can actually see them, so I'm not going to change my rating. Sorry. Next up we have Stairway to Armageddon. Armageddon kind of rhymes with heaven, I suppose, so yeah, I'll give you that one, Team 17. This is a platforming exercise, but with a twist, in that you have to climb up these stacks of targets to get to the crate, and all you've got to prune them into shape are shotguns. I wasn't that keen on this mission when I first started speedrunning this game, but this one's grown on me a bit. I think once you learn all the shotgun angles and how to optimise the movement on this is actually one that ticks along quite nicely. The shots that you have to do to get the mines out of the way are a nice little touch as well, and moderating your shots so that you don't run out of shotguns is a nice little challenge. There's no real tricks or anything on this one, it's just a movement optimization exercise. But as movement optimization exercises go, it's a pretty decent one, so I'm going to put this one in the good tier. I think I'm going to put this one just above Woodland. Next up we have Rainforest Ruckus. The artwork on this one is a little bit of a fixer-upper, as you can tell it's just detritus from the jungle terrain. Still, it gives you a chance to stare at the monkey vomiting up its own arm. This one is actually a pretty fun mission to do. It's the first mission in the game that gives you ninja ropes, and you get unlimited number of them, so you basically have free reign of the map. You also once again get to use as many weapons as you like during the turn, which basically forms the core of the strat behind this one. You get 8 cluster bombs and 8 grenades, and the way to kill the enemy worms off is by just dumping them en masse on the enemy worms' heads whilst on a ninja rope. These cause big fun multi-tier explosions that kill the enemy worms off, if you're lucky. Sometimes the cluster bomb one can be a bit harsh. And the challenge is basically just to try and do all of it in one turn. If the enemy worm gets a turn, then like you, they also get to spam infinite weapons during their turn time. And if you're in the wrong position, the gradually encroaching bazookas and shotguns that they fire can be a little disconcerting. However, a nice little trick if you're not the most gifted roper is that you can just land next to the left-hand worm just as the turn time ends, and if you're close enough, the enemy will just skip go. But yeah, this is a very enjoyable test of roping and precision on this one. So I'm going to put this one in the Great tier. I think I'm going to put this near the top of the Great tier as well. It's just a rare example of a mission in this campaign that really lets you cut loose. Next up we've got Castle Hassle. This map showcases one of my favourite bits of artwork in the game, so at the very least it's got that going for it. Just like the way the bouncy castle protrudes out the side of the real castle. Like, who hired that guy to renovate a listed building? This mission gives you an Armageddon that you can actually use to kill off the enemy worms, so it seems like it should be a enjoyable one. Unfortunately though, again, this is one that is hugely at the mercy of RNG. You rope all the way across to the crate, or use a jetpack if your roping fails, and then you let the end of the world loose on the enemy worms, and that's about it. The problem is that the two enemy worms on the left have a fair chance of coming out unscathed, which would be fine if you had anywhere good to shelter, but you have to use a blowtorch if you want to create that. So it's quicker to just set the Armageddon off and hope for the best. But the fact that RNG can just shaft you over so easily in this mission if it wants to means that, yeah, I can't really recommend this one. The lack of sufficiently quick backups on this one just render this very much blood and stomach pills territory for me. Although the fact that you get to do some roping and you get to use an Armageddon on it does still rank it pretty highly in the BS tier. Next up we've got All Quiet in the Library. Wait, hang on. Sorry, BookWorm. That's what this one's called, BookWorm. Hey, that's a much better title. Yeah, there's quite a few missions in Worms World Party that reuse maps from the Armageddon missions. I don't know if these missions were just put together rather hurriedly or something, but I don't know about these variations, to be honest. A lot of them don't really do anything that interesting with the original source material. This one introduces a genre of mission in this run that I like to call the walk and prod missions. Basically involves moving your worm from one side of the map to the other and killing the enemy worm off with a prod or a fire punch or any other close combat weapon that they might give you. You get a fast walk, which is good as skip walking is actually disabled in Worms World Party. If you try and spam right clicks the way you would in Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon, then it just opens the menu and stops your worm in place. Anyway, despite how basic this mission setup is, Mablak still somehow managed to find a speedrun strat for it. This one involves placing a girder at a specific position so that the enemy worm will try and throw a grenade at you, but it will actually bounce off the girder and hit them instead. Getting this blind spot is pretty difficult as it requires some fairly precise timing and positioning of the girder in order to manipulate the RNG that way. The strat's interesting at least, and I kind of wish it saved you more than like 3 or 4 seconds on this mission because it feels like a lot of effort for not that much gain. But it's at least a nice alternative way of doing what would otherwise be a fairly boring mission, so I would put this one in the average tier. I think just for the classiness of the girder strat I would put this towards the top of average. The same can't be said for the following two missions, which are both variants on the walk and prod mechanic. This first one, Parachute Problems, isn't so much walk and prod as float and axe. This mission is so ridiculously basic, it's untrue. It's what we call a crate trail mission, where you have to grab a series of spawning crates in a set order, and you have to get all of them in order to generate the end target. Literally all you need to do on this one is just float down, hold up and right, and then after the 10th crate that you grab, just go down a little bit. And that's it. Get the battle axe at the end, kill the target off, and boom. This is another one that's so simple that you can do this one blindfolded, and of the blindfolded missions it's probably the easiest one as well. Again, it's one that feels like it should be like a parachute training module rather than an actual full-blown mission, so yeah, this one goes in the BS tier as well. Pretty low down I'd say, but at the same time it's not really as unpleasant as something like Missile Base, so I'd say this one can go here. Actually, it's a bit more relaxing than doo-wop, so I'm going to put that above doo-wop as well. And then there's Pole to Pole, that basically takes place on a torture device that the Rick and Morty writers would probably be proud of. The mechanism here, in which the enemy worms basically launch mines up the tubes towards your worm, is kind of cool in its execution, but in terms of the object of the mission, once again, it's so simple. You can literally just jump continuously to the right with one early backflip in order to mix up the timing a bit, and you will be able to get to the end without any major problem. One thing I will say about this one is that you can do this blindfolded, but it is extremely difficult to do so, only because the sheer number of sound cues going off means that sometimes the jump sound cues get either diminished or just disappear entirely. And given how much you need sound to do these missions blindfolded, that does make this one significantly harder. But yeah, once you fire punched the enemy worm off, that's it. And the death animations of the worms would be pretty much intolerable to sit through if it wasn't for end skip. So yeah, another BS mission this one. I'm going to put this one just above Parachute Problems. Another bottom of the barrel title next in the form of Island Antics. They're on an island, they're getting up to Antics, we've got to write this stuff down. This is another crate trail mission, and you have to work your way across the terrain to the far left of the map, getting all the crates as you go. There's an enemy worm on this one who is once again completely ineffectual, which is a shame. I feel like them being at least some threat would mix this one up a little bit. There's a few fun things in this mission though. I like the jetpack over to the first crate, and then if you deactivate the jetpack you just fall straight down onto it, which saves you a little bit of time. You need the enemy to have a turn so that you can get the low grav crate, which is why you do that. Then there's the second worm, who is pretty much useless, so you can actually just kill them off using a well aimed shot with a longbow on the mine on the tree. It also gets the mine out of the way, so it's a double boon. The third turn is probably the low point of the mission, as that's when you have the low gravity and you just use that to platform your way across to the next crate. Though having said that, trying to get as far with the low gravity as you can on that turn is actually not too bad as far as challenges go. Then one more jetpack in which you have to avoid the mines on the trees, and you get a rare bit of notching in this run where you have to aim a grenade at the last crate that spawned back where you started. Possibly an unpopular opinion, but I actually quite enjoy the notching from Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon, so the fact that there's so little of it in this run is kind of disappointing. But yeah, you have to blow up the last crate that spawns. You can't actually collect it because if you do, that actually fails the mission automatically. So yeah, a little grab bag of tasks that you have to do on this one. So the fact that it mixes up a bit is a little bit more interesting. There's no real spellbinding tech on this one, but it's enjoyable enough to do. So I think this one I would put it fairly low in the good tier, just above Take Out the Trash. Next up we have Berlin Boss, another skippable mission. This is another mission that would be a fairly joyless platforming exercise were it not for our hero and friend, Jet Patrick. I actually find this one of the harder Jet Patricks to do, as the jetpack fuel to get to the highest lamppost is a little bit threadbare, and you can quite easily run out if you're not careful, so you have to pay attention to what you're doing here. Once you're up there though, if you place a girder and just hold up and right, your worm goes really high up and then will fall a significant distance to the right of the map, which cuts out a fair amount of faff in this one. If you get the right landing, you can actually land directly under the worm above you as well, which will cause them to skip turn, which is a nice little time save but pretty hard to route. Then you just shotgun your way through the lamppost and use your second shot to kill off the enemy worm's VIP by knocking them into the nearby supermine. It's a big obsession with supermines that Team 17 have in this run. They're not actually specially designed at all, it's just about like 10 mines placed in one position I think, but they do make for some fun launches on the enemies. So yeah, not really much to report on this mission either, other than because of Jet Patrick it's more enjoyable. I think most Jet Patrick missions will probably end up in the good tier, and this one's no exception, so we're going to put it above Take Out the Trash. And do I enjoy it more than Island Antics? Yeah, I do actually, it's a bit more to the point than Island Antics, so we're going to put it there. Next up we have Windymill On High. Whereas the first half of the run ended up being somewhat boat obsessed in the maps, the second half tends to veer more towards an obsession with windmills. Windmill, windmill for the ride. This is basically just a walk and prod mission again. There's not much that I can really say about this one or recommend of it. There's one fun little daredevil strat you can do here, which is trying to blowtorch away from the first mine and then jump away from it before it explodes. It saves you a few seconds on this one, but I find this strat to be particularly tough, so this is one that I think I would probably save more for ILs than I would for an actual run. But yeah, you get one parachute, you can float across the terrain, you then get to blowtorch your way through a windmill, and you just jump knock the enemy worm at the end rather than prod them, because it's just slightly quicker. That's it. I've had debates with people before about like the platforming aspect of worms, and I do want to stress that I do think platforming does have a place within the Worms games. There's definitely some enjoyable aspects to it, but I don't think it's the game's strongest suit, and the emphasis on platforming is so heavy in many of these missions that it just highlights how slow the whole platforming stuff is. And this is a classic example of that, so yeah, this is yet another Blood and Stomach Pills mission. And I think I would rank this one below Doo-Wop in terms of enjoyment. Next up we have Bunged Up, or as I would prefer to call this mission, Don't Force It. This is another gimmick mission, this one, and it's a really interesting one. The way you're supposed to do this one, as implied by the title, is you're supposed to use girders that you get from inside these taps or faucets to plug them up so that when you grab the bazooka crates on top of the taps, the enemy worms don't get ejected by the mines that spawn as a result. It's a bit of an elaborate setup, I know, but it does kind of make sense in practice. The enemy worms are quite superpowered. They can do fire punches, bazookas, and airstrikes. And you get to spam infinite weapons per turn on this one, which means that the enemy can as well, and therefore they're pretty dangerous. However, as speedrunners, we're meant to be unintimidated by such strength, so what we like to do is just set all the mines off so that the enemy worms all get ejected from the taps, and then we can blast them into the water. The enemies are all artillery worms, which means that as long as you don't stand right next to them, then you should be able to shelter from some of their worst excesses, just by positioning your worm tactically next to one of the other enemy worms. Particularly gifted ropers can use the ninja rope to fling bazookas at the enemy as well, which is without doubt the quickest way to try and pull this off if you're good at it. As it stands, I'm not too strong on that one, so I tend to have to stand while I do my bazookas instead, which is a shame for me, as if you're able to do the quick version of it, then you can actually place your worm in a position that manipulates the enemy into skipping go on their turn, which is a significant time save. Another bizarre little quirk about this mission is it's the first of two instances where we get to use a glitch called Team Skip. The enemy worms in this mission are split into two teams of 3, both of which are named Enemy. There's one member of each team in each of the taps, so it's a little difficult to keep track of them all given that they've all got the same names and health. However, if you can, this enables you to do a little skip where if you just kill off one of the teams and then kill your worm off, the game gets a bit confused when you get to the menu screen, and so classes it as a win even though you didn't kill off all the enemy worms. It doesn't work with both of the teams in the mission. You have to go with one specific team, so that limits the routing of this one a little bit, but it's still a decent skip to do for this mission. And yeah, even though I don't consider myself very good at this mission at the moment, as showcased in certain marathons I can mention, this is very much one I would like to get good at, because I think the overall strat for this one is pretty fun. Very difficult, but fun. I'm going to put this mission at the top of the good tier, I think. It's not quite interesting enough for me to put it in the great tier, but there's a lot I like about this one. Next up we have Steeple Jack. I feel like him and Jet Patrick would make a good team somehow. This is what I would refer to as a trick shot mission, in that the actual vanilla way of completing it is to do a specifically set up trick shot in order to kill off a few different worms at once. In this instance, it involves baseball batting one of your worms onto a mine that's near the upper enemy worm, which will then knock them down to the lower enemy worm and kill them off with grave damage. These are the sort of strats that kind of fun to find in Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon, so it's a bit of a shame that it's effectively given to you as the main way of doing it in this mission, but nonetheless it's not necessarily unenjoyable to do. Like in many of the missions in this run, you spend a fair amount of time placing girders at the beginning, which is not particularly interesting, but the low grav baseball bat that you do at the top of the girders feels kind of cool. So yeah, this one's decent, not amazing. I think this one I would put fairly low in the good tier. Just above Island Antics seems right to me. Next up we have Radical Rescue. This is another one of those missions that feels like it should have been a training module instead, or perhaps one of the time attack missions in the game, as those feature quite a few little challenges like this that can be quite fun. It's a basic crate trail mission. You just have to grab all the crates in a specific order using the jetpack. I quite like the red herring double damage crate that falls in the bottom right hand corner, as you don't have to get it, but if you do, then the holy hand grenade crate you need to collect spawns just a little bit quicker. So that's a fun little challenge, and it's nice to actually see the holy hand grenade in use in this run for the one and only time. But yeah, just a bit too simple really for me, this one, although it goes in the average tier because it's at least a fairly fun jetpack exercise to do. Putting it high in the average tier actually, because just the smoothness of the jetpack just gives it that little extra edge. Next up we got Roping with Dinosaurs. This is another one where you get to do a lot of ninja roping, which is pretty good on this terrain because as it's a cavern, then there's loads of places you can fire it without having to worry too much. The object is to kill all 4 of the enemy worms off, but you have to ensure that you end your turn on a platform where you're not next to an enemy who's about to have a turn, as they can very easily one-shot you with a fire punch. They can also shoot you with a bazooka if they manage to grab any of your bazooka crates that spawn around the levels, so the way I like to do this one is to try and get the bazooka crates in an order that means that none of the enemy worms actually get access to them. It's another mission that features dropping bazookas from a ninja rope as a prominent part of the strat, which although it isn't my strength, I generally tend to do alright with it on this one, with some exceptions. But yeah, I think the threat of the enemy worms makes this one an interesting puzzle to untie. Again, it kind of makes me wish that more of the enemy worms were a threat in this run, because it does feel like more of a worms game when you've got enemies throwing bazookas and punches at you. Oh yeah, this one's pretty enjoyable, I'd say. I think this one goes fairly high in the good tier. Trying to think whether I'd put it above or below Shell Shock. I think just for ease of movement I would put this above Shell Shock. Next up, it's the Fontella Base Special. This is another mission with VIPs in it, and I think of all the VIP missions in the game, this is the one that makes the most sense that it has VIPs in it. Your 2 hatted worms are being bombarded with rapidly spawning mines, and you have to find a way to stop them from taking damage and kill the enemy worm off before it's too late. The strat for this is fairly simple, starting by setting off a low grav and then just jumping your way to the right so that you can grab some girders. You actually only need the one girder to save the VIP on the left, as with the right hand VIP they don't take enough damage provided that you kill the enemy worm off quickly enough. So this one just a kind of basic movement optimization exercise, but I quite enjoy doing this one. It's another skippable mission, so you don't have to do it if you find it a problem, but I can't see why you would. So yeah, it's walk and prod, but with a twist that I think spices up the whole idea, and I would put this one somewhere in the middle of the good tier, I think. I think between Stairway to Armageddon and Woodland seems like a good bet. Next up we have Jegg Central. According to Urban Dictionary, a Jegg is someone who spends a lot of their time trying to be cool but just isn't, and Central means somewhere in the middle. What does this title mean? Let me know. This is another crate trail mission, and again this is one that I think would fit quite well in Time Attack actually, as it's a nice little exercise in making platforms with girders and longbows. The machine gun longbow that you get to spam in order to create the platforms is fun, if a little bit RSI inducing. Always reminds me a little bit of the archers in Lemmings to the Tribes. But yeah, it's a mixture of grabbing crates and then hitting targets with your longbow. You get a fast walk on this one, which makes movement a little bit quicker, and the final crate contains an MB bomb, which is yet another super weapon you don't get to use. But overall, yeah, decent target practice mission, this one. I think I would put this one fairly low in the good tier. Let's say just above Steeple Jack. Another recycled map from Worms Armageddon here, in the form of Chase the Ace. I really liked the original Mars Star mission in Armageddon, and I have to say that Chase the Ace does not hold a candle to it at all. It's yet another tiresome platforming exercise involving girders and bungees and low fuel jetpacks. The jetpack you get so late in the mission that you can't even do a good jetpack trick with it because there's just no point. And there is a bungee fling that you can do on this one, but it is even harder to micromanage than the one that we did in Missile Base. There's just so few safe places to land with this bungee, and it's so deep into the run as well that like actually wanting to do the bungee fling at this point just it's rarely going to happen unless you're behind pace and just don't care. It's a fun bungee when it comes off, don't get me wrong, it's just not really viable. Yeah, just pointless slog of a mission, this one. I don't rate this one highly at all. Quite the opposite. This one goes in the blood and stomach pills tier. I'm going to place it just above Windymill On High because there's at least a few extra possibilities of how you can do this one than that, but yeah, I don't rate it. Next up we've got I Rule The Rooster. I like how this just looks like this cockerel, but 20 years later. This mission contains one of my favourite jetpack tricks in the entire run. It's a bit of a difficult one to pull off, but ooh, so good. You have to do a standard bit of low grav and girder nonsense at the beginning just to get onto the rooster. Once you're up there though, you get the jetpack crate, you do a pretty specific jump to get over this mine onto the rooster's tail, and that gives you enough of a vantage point to be able to do a jetpack trick where you drop a mine into the water as you go across the map, and then time it so that you jetpack knock the enemy's VIP into the water. The enemy can't do anything about you apart from a airstrike if you wait too many turns, but they're no real threat like most of the enemy worms in this game. You don't necessarily have to do the jetpack knock here, you can just jetpack onto the lilies and then shoot through them to get the VIP on the third turn. So there's options, you don't have to do it the most dangerous way, but where's the fun in that? Yeah, fun mission this one. I think the first turn is a little bit staid, but the second turn is an absolute delight. So I'm going to put this one near the top of the good tier. Do I rate this one better than Bunged Up? I think I do, yeah. Next up we have Super Tricky Sheep. Another skippable mission this one, although it's so short there's no real point. The object of this one is to guide a super sheep around the crate trail that spawns on the heads of your VIPs. Eventually you're given some battle axes so that you can continuously cut the enemy worms in half until they eventually die. Jesus Christ, the normal version of this mission is long. The super sheep handling in Worms World Party Remastered is so laggy that like trying to do this mission the normal way is horrendous. So better instead to just launch the super sheep where you are, deactivate their flight, and then just blow them up so that they're just far enough away from you to not kill your worm, but close enough to kill the two adjacent enemy worms. It's a pretty basic cheese. It does require a little bit of knowing what you're doing as far as getting the right position on the sheep all the time, but yeah, it's not that hard to do. So yeah, just another weirdly designed mission that doesn't make sense, but I don't mind this. I would put this in the average tier as it's pretty inoffensive and you can get it out of the way quite quickly. Think I'll put this one just above its raining mines. Next up we've got Down on the Farm. This map is borrowed from Rumble in the Farmyard from Armageddon, the mission which I voted my favourite of the missions in that run. Probably won't be that surprising to say that this doesn't live up to those lofty heights by any chalk. The object of this one is to kill the enemy worms VIPs off by knocking them into nearby supermines. We reset this mission once so that we get a extra baseball bat crate, as this speeds things up a little bit on this one. To be honest though, there's no real challenge on this one, apart from with the baseball bat, you want to line that up so that you can get the second VIP into the water rather than having to get them over to the mine that's on top of the well. But it just feels a little bit gimmicky, this one. It just feels like an excuse to watch hatted worms blast off into the stratosphere rather than anything else. You've also got an enemy worm with all the health underneath the hay bale, who yet again has no offensive capacity whatsoever, at least within the turns that we take to get this mission done. And the headless chicken in this mission has become something of an icon around my stream, to the point where I made an emote out of it. So I do have some affection for this mission on that basis. And it's not unpleasant to do, really, this one. It's just kind of a bit of a... bit nothing, really. So I put this one in the average tier. I think I'll put this one just below Operation Alcatraz, which I haven't changed my mind about at this point. Next up, the one I'm sure you've all been looking forward to, it's Icy Encounter. Excellent mission, really fun challenge this one, absolutely peerless, gotta go into the championship. I can't keep a straight face when doing that. This is basically the sinking ice cap map from Armageddon repurposed into being the longest mission out of, I think, any of the missions across the second generation Worms games. I think possibly Behalf of Alla in Worms 2 might be of a similar length, but it's definitely not of a similar level of abject tedium, because my god, this mission just goes on and on and on. It's just atrocious. The object of this one is to kill all the enemy worms off, but lo and behold, you don't start with any weapons, so you have to travel all the way across the map to get some crates with bazookas and grenades in them. As per usual, you don't get ninja ropes, so you have to use girders and parachutes to make your way across there, which this is not the ideal territory for, to be honest. A little shortcut you can do at the beginning with some blowtorches to get up through the terrain rather than having to go around it, but beyond that there's not really much in the way of speeding up the travel across the map. What makes this mission super annoying and so much of a slog is that this is the first of a few missions where you have to keep both of your worms alive. If even one of your worms dies, the other one automatically surrenders. So it's not a mission where you can just dump one of your worms in the sea and then just carry on with the other one. Like, you actively have to go out of your way to ensure that they both don't tank too much damage. In fairness, like, there is some utility to keeping both your worms alive on this one, because the enemy worms are spread out quite a bit across the level, so it's useful to have one remain on the left hand side while the one goes over to the right. But you've got no select worm capacity in this mission, so when you're doing a turn where one of the worms is not useful, you just have to skip go. There's a few grenade shots in this mission that are kind of alright to do, like including the only max bounce grenade in the run. So there's something there, but honestly though, this mission is just absolutely turgid beyond belief. It's just so bad. The one thing I would say in this mission's defense is it might make a little more sense if it was at the end of the run. Because it's so long, it would feel like kind of a viable final challenge mission. But the fact that it appears 32nd out of 45 missions just means that you have to plod through this, and then you've got another 13 missions to go after it, and at that point it's just like, oh yeah, horrible idea for a mission, this one. This goes easily right down the bottom of Blood and Stomach Pills. Next mission is Have No Fear, Old Dear. Another target practice mission, this one, and maybe one that would make more sense in Time Attack, I don't know, but yeah, it's basically just shoot the 6 enemy worms with bazookas as quickly as you can. There's a rapid parade of falling old women that will get in the way, and you will lose 5 seconds for every one you hit, so there is a real possibility that you can end up failing this one if you're not careful with the timing of your shots. The main trick with this one is to line up your bazooka shots so that you get the enemy worm as central as you possibly can, so that you only need to do 2 bazooka shots on them to kill them off, and then just turn around so that you can do the exact same shot on the worm on the other side. Fairly simple, decent challenge, although I will say that on an aesthetic level this mission is just way too loud. I think they could have toned down the volume of the old women falling noises a little bit, especially considering you can't actually adjust the volume in this game. There is also a weird glitch in this mission that I stumbled upon once and don't appear to have been able to recreate, where you can actually limit the number of old women that fall, and then after 10 of them go down, then you basically just have a free shot at all the remaining enemy worms after that. No one else has managed to reproduce this glitch yet, so if anyone does think they're good at finding this sort of tech in games, then hell, hit us up, please. Although to be fair, it wouldn't save you that much time on this mission, it would just make it easier to avoid the old women. But yeah, this mission's fine. It's more of a get it out of the way mission than one that I actively look forward to, but hey, after Icy Encounter, anything seemed decent. We'll put this one in the average tier, I say, and I'll pop this one just below Operation Alcatraz. Coming up next, we've got Back and Forth. This is another mission where I find the aesthetic of the map a lot more enjoyable than the actual task. It's actually the Canyons map from Worms Armageddon, but it's been reskinned so that it's become this nice little adventure playground with some confused looking wooden giraffes in it. You have to grab yourself crates from the left and right hand side of the map, which contain shotguns and girders, of which you only really need the former. The object is to blow up a crate in the middle of the terrain, which, surprise surprise, it contains a donkey. Some real anti-fun propaganda going on in this game. The terrain of this map isn't necessarily ideal for roping, particularly given how many mines have just been carelessly strewn about. There's a few little rope flings you can do here to save a bit of time, but getting anything substantial in is pretty difficult. There's a great IL video by We Suck at Speedruns where he manages to get all 3 of the crates on the first turn and then uses the shotgun right at the end, so that's well worth a watch. But yeah, this one just feels a bit repetitive. It's not a terrible mission, but like, it's, of all the ninja rope missions in the game, this one does feel like a bit more of a slog than some of the others. The giraffes put me in a bit of a better mood about this one than I would feel otherwise, but I think fairly low I would put this one in the average tier. I think I'll put this one just above Good Ship Armageddon. Next up we have Beachside Juggler. There's another map that might look familiar to Armageddon players. This is the beach map that you can play in multiplayer. It's also a trick shot mission, this one, but I have to say that the trick shot that you set up on this one is an absolute joy to do. You basically need to get across to the enemy worm, and then using low gravity you prod them onto a mine which will launch them into the air, and then you get to use a minigun to blast them into the water. What makes this one tougher to do in the speedrun is trying to do this all in one turn, because you can use the low gravity to get some better jumps in earlier on so that you can get the ninja rope quicker, but then actually getting across to where the enemy worm is requires some very precise movement. You want to drop off the ninja rope ideally straight down so that your worm goes head first into the terrain, which gives them a slightly quicker recovery animation. But yeah, the added pressure that you have in terms of getting all this stuff done really quickly, I have to say I really enjoy this one. And it's just such a satisfying payoff as well doing the minigun shot right just as the turn time ends. Yeah, in many ways this mission is still just as on rails as a lot of the other ones in the game, but as far as on rails challenges go, I have to say this one is pretty gorgeous. I'm going to put this one in the champion tier. Yes, we finally found a mission worthy in Worms World Party of going in the top tier. Who bloody Ray? Next up we've got End of the Line. This map here is recycled from Do the Locomotion in Armageddon, and I will say of all the recycled map missions in this game, this is probably the only one that actually gives the original a run for its money in terms of enjoyment. This is another crate trail mission, and the hook with this one is that the crates almost all spawn on top of mines, so you have to be careful when you grab the crates, particularly when you're going over the top of the train, where you basically have a string of mines that you have to avoid with some very careful but also very quick jumps. I would say if any mission in this run was going to make the case for Worms as a platformer rather than combat, this would be the one, because I feel like the platforming challenges in this are just really good fun. It's very tough, especially because it's another mission where the two worms both have to be kept alive, as losing one will cause the other to just pull the white flag out. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high on this one, but I like this mission a lot. There's one thing that holds this mission back from being champion tier for me, and that's the fact that Worm 1 is pretty much useless in this one. There's a nice little puzzle at the beginning of the mission where you have to get Worm 1 out of the way of the mine and then switch worms so that you can continue without losing the mission. But once that's over with, Worm 1 has no utility whatsoever, and every turn that you get with them you just have to skip go. And for me, that's just irritating enough to cost it a place in the champion tier. But I'd still say this mission belongs right at the top of the great tier. I like this one a lot. Next up we have Take 'em Down. This is another gimmick mission, and it's a particularly elaborate one layout wise. It's a crate trail mission where each crate that you grab blows up some of the targets in the middle of the central stack, so that eventually the VIP worm who's standing on top of the targets will hit the mines below the enemy worms and kill all three of them off in one go. Or at the very least it'll kill the two at the edge off. The bottom one actually doesn't need to be killed, weirdly enough. If you're planning to do this the vanilla way, which is just a roping exercise, then I would advise try not to do it in 4x3, as it took me a long time to be able to get the measure of doing this one without my worm actually just flying off screen and missing the very limited terrain you've got to swing from. However, there's no real reason to do this the vanilla way, as Mablak found a wonderful little shortcut on this mission. It involves doing a very special rope knock where you vibrate your worm very quickly between the corner of the rather unflattering yellow lines at the top of the map, and then release your worms so that they bounce off the wall and knock the VIP down. Once again, like in Armageddon, rope knocking is technically disabled in Worms World Party except outside of turn time, and because you lose the turn through flinging your worm around, then you actually get to knock the VIP down. Once the VIP's down there, it's just a case of getting up onto the stack of targets and then falling down to the left so that you set both of the mines off, and that kills all three of the worms that you need to kill off, meaning that you can just quit straight out to the menu. It's a really nice innovative shortcut, this one, but also the actual vanilla mission I find quite enjoyable to do as well as far as roping exercises go. So I'm going to say this one goes at the top of the good tier for me. I don't know if I quite like it enough to put it in the great tier, but actually no, I like how effortless this one is. I think I'm going to put this at the bottom of the great tier, just above apple of your eye. Next up we have Pie Eating Piper. This mission seems designed to rub salt into the wound of not getting a donkey in any of the previous missions, as there's a massive statue of one as the terrain. And also the enemy worm has access to the donkey as well, so they get to have nice things. This is another gimmick mission, and it's the only mission I think out of any of the second generation games that explicitly requires knowledge of how the AI works in order to find the solution. The vanilla strat involves prodding this target over and over again so that a trail of first aid crates drops onto the terrain, leading all the way to the pit of mines at the far right. Once you then blowtorch through the donkey's legs, the greedy enemy worm will make their way to the right to grab the crates, given that AI are automatically drawn to any crates that are near them. And if you've done 4 crates, then they will lead the enemy worm so far that they'll actually run out of time, meaning that they can't attack you. So then you can just use the prod to knock them into the pile of mines, and hey ho. This mission actually seemed unbreakable for quite a while, so shout out to Mablack, who apparently tested over 100 girder positions to find a shortcut in this level. There were several cool variations that Mablack found, but the best one involves placing a girder using the enemy's name as a terrain marker, and then blowtorching the enemy so that they take a certain amount of damage from the blowtorch, and then they will try and fire punch you into oblivion, which will then cause your grave damage to knock them into the nearby mine, killing them off in one go. This is such a mind-blowingly cool skip as far as I'm concerned, and even though I would say it's not necessarily the most exciting one to implement physically, I still think it's so cool it has to go in the great tier. I think I would put this one at the bottom of the great tier. Next up we have Plain Crazy. This one isn't so much walk and prod as a fly and prod, perhaps? I don't know. Gotta kill the enemy worm off on the right, and you've got a grenade that you can use. I always particularly enjoy We Suck at Speedrun's IL video of this mission, in which he manages to get a perfect 4-second low gravity grenade to hit the worm. For the speedrun, there's 2 ways you can do this one. You can do a jetpack trick, which involves resetting the mission 3 times. This then gives you a jetpack, and you can just use the grenade to get all the way across the Atlantic in 5 seconds. The enemy worm, once again, has very little that they can do of any substance, so their turn time is brief, and you can just then prod or Dragon Ball them into the water. Quickest method, though, is using a grenade from the top of Lady Liberty to get them into the water. This can be set up in the previous turn by lining up your grenade using her dress, although you do have to be careful when switching to the girder that you use to get up onto the top of the statue that you don't actually reset the angle to that of blowtorch level, given that blowtorch and girder are both on the F7 line of weapons. So movement wise it can be a bit fiddly, but yeah, this one's kind of cool. I think this one can go pretty high in the good tier. I'd say I would put this one just above Bunged Up, I think. Next up we have All Aboard. This mission is exactly the same premise as Jumpjet Defence. You get an Armageddon and a jetpack, and you have to use the Armageddon to kill off the enemy worm and then land on the terrain afterwards safely. The problem with this mission though is I think you're going to need a bigger boat, because I have had instances where this boat has been absolutely decimated by the Armageddon and there's nowhere to land afterwards, so it just becomes a big RNG exercise. So even with the floating above the spawn plane cheese that we learnt in Jumpjet Defence, there's still no guarantee you're actually going to do this mission in one. However, Psychotropic found a lovely little consistent strat for this one, where you actually just lure the enemy worm off the side of the boat so that they do one shotgun at you and then just stop. And the position that they stop in means that you can then just do a back jump off the side of the boat that will knock them into the water but not yourself. And this is another skippable mission as well, so if you don't really like this one, then you can just do the all missions any % run and just skip straight through it. I think the back jump strat makes this slightly more interesting, although obviously it doesn't have the theatrics of the Armageddon, but that gives it enough to put it into the average tier for me, just as a fun way of subverting how the mission's supposed to go. I think I would put this at the top of the average tier, actually, because it's pretty painless. Next up we have Bungee Fun, a mission so notorious that I've actually done a tutorial for it on my YouTube channel. This is a crate trail mission, and it's another one that seems like it would make more sense as training rather than missions, but if you leave that aside, I'm going to say I think this is one of the most fun missions in the game, much as its name would suggest. It's definitely not an easy one to get the hang of. You basically have to get your bungee tech down so that you can go between the small swings that you need to grab the first lot of crates into the large swings that you need to grab the second lot. This is really the key behind doing this mission, and I've managed to find a rhythm for it that works pretty consistently for me. So do check out my video on it if you want to know more about that. But honestly, the bungee swinging just feels really nice and therapeutic, and you get to use a couple of homing missiles to kill the enemy worms off at the end as well. You do have to be careful about how you line the shots up so that you don't end up knocking the enemy worms straight back onto the platforms they're standing, but honestly, this is a big favourite mission of mine in this run. I never get tired of doing this one. So I think this one I'm going to put in the champion tier as well. Not sure if I rate it higher or lower than Beachside Juggler. I think I'm going to put it lower. But it's very close for me. Next mission is Hindenburger. Oh, stop, you're making me hungry now. This is another mission where I can't really tell if it's a troll or just badly designed, because it's supposed to be an elaborate jetpack and girder platforming exercise to get up to the mysteriously green enemy worm so that you can fire punch them off the face of the earth, but there's an indestructible border around the entire map, so you actually can just walk along the bottom of the map without having to worry about going into the water at all, and that basically just sucks all of the challenge out of it, to be honest. Still, there is some fun to be had with the optimization in this one, and you get to use our old friend Jet Patrick again just so that you can get across to the left hand side of the level a fair bit quicker. You can switch between worms on this one, which is a rare luxury in this run, and you get to do a fun jetpack fire punch to kill the enemy worm off, which is a move that you don't really get to see enough of in speedruns. Overall though, it's just another kind of like slightly nothingy mission, this one, and it's another one that I've been able to do blindfolded just because the strats are fairly basic. Although that said, I think this is one of the most fun ones to do blindfolded. I like this a lot on that basis. I think this one I will put low in the good tier, and I think I'm going to end up pushing Take Out the Trash off screen with this one. That actually we'll put it here just above Island Antics. Next up we have Puzzle at Mill. Okay, deep breath. Okay, where do we start with this one? This is a gimmick mission, and it's just so badly designed. The vanilla strat for this actually sounds like the speedrun strat for this one because of how convoluted it is. The notes on the menu tell you what you're meant to do. You need to kill off 2 enemy worms with 1 move on the first turn, and then the second one is all about timing. What this actually means in practice is on the first turn you grab a crate which causes a mine to spawn next to the right hand worm, launching them over to where the middle worm is. You're meant to use a girder to both create a bridge to get across the gap and plug the enemy worm next to the trapped worm so that their grave damage will kill them off as well. This sounds like a great idea until you realise that because of the frame detection on the mine, there's a chance that the enemy worm that you launch can end up overshooting where they're supposed to go, which there's nothing you can do about if that happens, apart from reset. Then with the second enemy worm you're supposed to kill, it's meant to be a case of jumping onto the nearby crate and Dragon Balling the enemy worm into the mines that spawn directly to their right. Getting this so that it actually kills off the enemy worm is so finicky and precise, and to be fair, Mablack has found a method of doing this, but it feels like you shouldn't have to do that just to get the vanilla version of this mission done correctly. What's more likely to happen is the enemy worm will just fall down to the bottom with relatively low HP, and if that happens, all you can really do is basically just throw your worm onto the enemy worm from a great height until your worm runs out of health and their grave damage kills them off. Basically turning this mission into a sketch from Chris Morris's Jam. What makes this so joyless is there's just no real good backups to any of this. Mablack has found some alternative versions of this mission, which aren't necessarily quite as fast as doing it the vanilla way, but can be more consistent. The one that I tend to use is a jetpack suicide move, which involves my worm using the grave damage to blow up the crate next to the enemy worm and launching them off a very specifically placed girder so that they land in the water. This is a pretty darn precise strat, and what makes it kind of unpleasant to do is the fact that you have to nudge along the enemy worm's head very gingerly with the jetpack, and it's so easy to just overshoot the position that you need and grab the crate, which ruins the whole MacGuffin. There's also a strat where you can place a girder to catch the mines in a very specific position and then prod the enemy worm onto them, but that one's also dependent on the frame detection of the mine not ruining it for you. Yeah, honestly, I think this mission just is abominable. It's just... there's just so few redeeming features to this one. I'd rank this one even lower than I would rank Icy Encounter here. I cannot say any nice things about this mission, no matter how hard I try. Penultimate mission now in the form of Revenge at Stonehenge, which I believe is the Stones map from Worms Armageddon, but repurposed to have a hippie in it, just to give it a little more cultural flavour. And also some faces that wouldn't look out of place in Nightmare. Password. This mission is another one whereby doing the intended strat is just a slog. It's just a whole load of waiting for certain crates to spawn, placing girders and hoping that you get great wind so that the parachute can take you to the crate that you need. Fortunately, we get one last appearance from our good mate Jet Patrick that enables us to sail to the end without a care in the world, apart from maybe some mines that might fly around if you put the grenade in the wrong place. The one drawback of this is you actually have to reset the mission 5 times before the game gives you a jetpack crate, although even with that it's still quicker than doing this mission the intended way. So because we can cheese this one, then I wouldn't put this one as low as Blood and Stomach Pills, but I can't really put it much higher than average either. I think I'll put this pretty high in the average one just because I do find the jetpack trick quite fun to do. But yeah, not really one of my favourite appearances from the JP man. And finally, Invertebrate Invaders. This is another gimmick mission, but it's a cool gimmick mission. It's basically repurposing worms as a kind of makeshift space invaders. You have to kill off the enemy worms who are stowed away in invading ships as mines fall down towards your VIPs that can kill them off if you leave them for too long. You only have an infinite amount of bazookas to kill off the enemy worms, so it's just a nice little shootout that you can do at the end of the run to let off some steam. This is the only other mission apart from Bunged Up which contains team skip as well, due to the 2 identically named teams, so you actually only need to kill off the 4 right hand worms on this one to obtain a victory. Once again, credit to Mablack for finding a lovely little series of precise shots that you can do in order to kill them off relatively quickly. Can take a while to get used to these shots, especially since a few of them are not full power shots, so you have to learn the visual cues on the gauge of the bazooka to ensure you get them right. But yeah, I don't mind the tech on this one at all. I think this is a fun way of rounding off the run. It's also kind of an anticlimactic one given you only have to kill off 4 of the enemy worms to achieve victory, but hey, an end is an end. I'm going to put this one in the good tier, and I think I'm going to pop this one just above Jegg Central. So yeah, that is my full evisceration of Worms World Party in tier list form. Do you agree with these rankings? Do you disagree with these rankings? Are you completely ambivalent to these rankings? Let me know in the comments below. Quick shout out to everyone who's routed this run over the years. Of course, Mablack, We Suck at Speedruns, Psychotropic and H3O Charles. Thank you very much for watching, and this video is over.